Bienvenidos to the Paseo podcast. I am your host, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon, and today we are joined by Puerto Rican author Javier Hernández. He was born in Rio Piedras, Puerto Rico, and is a father, author, artist, linguist, entrepreneur, pro-sovereignty advocate, and indigenous rights activist. He has 2 books out that caught my attention, and I hope they catch your attention too. Their names are Puerto Rico, The Economic Case for Sovereignty, which the English version just dropped, but there's also a Spanish version. And the other book is Brexit, Forging Puerto Rico's Path to Sovereignty. Again, both are in English and in Spanish. So on today's show, we're going to focus more on the concepts and proposals that Javier maps out in the former. Longtime listeners know that I am no stranger to having discussions on Puerto Rico's status on this show and to having guests on that have different viewpoints on what that status should be. Now, we've had people on the show that are pro-Commonwealth, pro-statehood, pro-independence. And as a Boricua in the diaspora, personally, I think having these discussions is critical to challenging us on the way we think about Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States, as well as strengthens our critical thinking skills as it relates to Puerto Rico's status and its future. That's why we have Javier here, because as you can tell from his book titles, Javier is pro-independence, and I'm very excited to welcome him on today to discuss his viewpoints and perspectives. So to anyone who is anti-independence for Puerto Rico, we're not here to bash you, but I do want you to lean into this discussion and, of course, reach out to the show at Paseo Podcast on any of our social media channels with your feedback. All that said, Javier, welcome to the Paseo Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, very well. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for inviting me on the show, and I'm really happy to be here.
So you're born in Puerto Rico, growing up in the United States. You mentioned, kind of having that awakening moment that really shifted your perspective on what Puerto Rico's status should be. So looking at all the stuff you've written, I mean, what really was that moment that inspired you to start writing about Puerto Rico?
Yeah. So when I first realized anything, as a kid, I would always go back to Puerto Rico for vacations or pretty much almost every summer. As a kid, I was in Puerto Rico in San Juan or in El Campo. And so I always had that connection that was always there. But in terms of status or anything political, I was so ignorant. My parents didn't tell me anything about it. No uncles, aunts. It was like just a taboo subject you just don't talk about, And then one day, my uncle came back from I guess like a march or a marcha, whatever. And he had the flag of the Independence Party and the Puerto Rican flag. And I was like, wow, what's that? And he was like, oh, I was at a march. For what? Oh, for independence. I'm like, what? Like, what are you? And mind you, I was like 8 or 9 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And he explained to me briefly, kind of like, Puerto Rico, the colony, And it was the first time I realized that. It was like almost like I kind of, like in the Matrix when Neo wakes up from that capsule.
Yep. Yeah.
Like just what the hell? Real? This is reality. This exactly. You wake up and you're like, oh my God, this is for real. This is not fake. And it was a shock to me because growing up in the U.S., going to American schools, independence is taught as that's the best you can get to as a nation. I mean, everyone wants their independence. Everyone fights against colonialism. That's basic. Every American student gets that. And I went to American school. Mm-hmm. And then I come to Puerto Rico, and then I'm now notified that this is what's going on, and it's shocking, So that stayed with me for a few years. And then when I was in high school, I finally had the wherewithal to educate myself more on the subject. And so I just read a lot of books about Puerto Rico, history, books. I just went to a library, got as many books as I could. And just from that, I felt like I gravitated more to the pro-independence philosophy or ideology or sentiment, just being, because growing up in the U.S., I know how a lot of Americans treat or view Puerto Ricans. We're minorities. There's a lot of negative connotations. So I see how they look at us because I lived it. And then seeing how they do that in Puerto Rico. And I just thought that was wrong.
Yeah.
And then
well, I mean, many people don't even realize that Puerto Rico is owned by the United States.
Exactly.
They don't even know that it's a colony.
No, have no idea. And I remember in school, in high school, there were times where it was discussed. It was kind of brought up briefly in history class, and I would be the one Boricua in the class that would raise my hand and try to get the teacher to express more information. Not one paragraph, but And I got in trouble. They would be like, Javier, please go to the principal's office. I don't need this information. We don't care. Wow. I mean, and all they would teach in the classes is the U.S. Invaded Puerto Rico in the Spanish-American War, and now in 1950, blah blah, they were Commonwealth, and now they're happy. Next, that was it. That was all. That was, and then I'm in the classroom trying to talk about the Ponce Massacre, and the Rio Piedras Massacre, and Blanton Winship, and all this other stuff, and the American teachers did not want to hear it. So having that experience, I'm like, I don't want this for Puerto Rico. So I already had that distinction. I knew I was different. I'm Puerto Riqueño. And that's it. There's no, like, oh, I'm an American of Puerto Rican descent. That just didn't fit in my head, that notion. So then in college, I just educated myself more on the subject. By high school, I was very, very already adamant pro-sovereignty, pro-independence. When you learn about Albizu, Betances, and all these other, Blanca Canales, all these other patriots, and you see their life, it inspires you because sometimes and you grow up in the diaspora, you don't get a lot of Puerto Rican role models that are amazing people. Sometimes it's very negative, or oh, look at that criminal over there. In TV, you get a lot of this. Either you're a drug dealer, or you're a mafia, or you're a gang banger guy. But then when you read about Albizu and Betances and all this other stuff, you see like, wow, Boricuas can get to that level? That's great, because no one told me this. No one, not even family, told me this. Or
If we could just kind of shift gears a little bit to your second book that's out, Puerto Rico: The Economic Case for Sovereignty. I thought it might be good to give people kind of like a baseline understanding of some of the research that you've done to assemble your book and your other writings. Like what are, from what you've found and researched, what are economists and other experts saying about the Puerto Rican economy as it stands today?
Great question. Well, to even get to even begin to answer that question, even the book for this is, I've read so many books about Puerto Rico and independence and history, and never have I found a book that explains how Puerto Rico could or would function under sovereignty, under any form of sovereignty at all. It was just always, in independence, it's, we needed it, it's a human right. Yeah, we got that. But then how do you economically, because that's always the big argument. A lot of anti-independence people point out, oh, Puerto Rico's too small, or Puerto Rico can't survive without the US economically. And that's how they shut down the independence conversation. So, and I know that that's not true, but I couldn't find a book. So I did it. So I did the research. It took a few years to get all the information. But all the information is not, some secret private study. Everything is public domain. You could find this stuff on the internet, but a lot of information, then you have to extrapolate some information from it. Like there's the data, and then you have to get the information from it and interpret it. So what a lot of economists say about Puerto Rico today, and this is my criticism, is they only focus on the colony. They only focus now and in the past, but then if it comes to discussing the future, they freeze up or don't know what to say, or they don't want to burn any bridges academically with their jobs, whatever. So I'm not tied to, and I'm getting a lot of debate. A lot of people are very excited for the book. They're very happy. People are like, finally, yes, we have the information for, this is what we've been waiting for. Thank you. So, but there are other people, usually a lot of the pro-statehood people, who are angry at me for coming up with this because it destroys the narrative that Puerto Rico can't survive on its own. So I am getting some flack for that from those people, but I tend to just ignore that criticism. So, and I just focus on the people who are really happy to get the information. They want to get more information. Sometimes you even get some people who are pro-statehood, but as soon as and this is what I love, once they read the information or get that knowledge, now they're open to independence. And those are the people I'm trying to reach. I'm not trying to reach the independent supporter who's already pro-independent. I'm trying to reach the people who are, pro-Commonwealth, pro-statehood. They think independence is a great idea, but then they think that, oh no, but we can't do it economically, so I'll just stick to statehood. But then when they get the information that yes, we can, and I'm not talking about barely skimming by economically. I'm talking about like Puerto Rico could become an economic powerhouse in the Caribbean. Like a major economy, the biggest market in the Caribbean. We can do that. Then when you see all the proposals in the book, people, it opens up the imagination that Puerto Rico can do more. And that's what I want to have people realize.
So if we're just writing off things as not being possible, we're losing our complete imagination on what could be. And I think to your point, like you get people that just kind of look at Puerto Rico's status debate in a very narrow box. And ultimately, that's not fair for La Isla.
Jumping off what you said,
yeah,
Puerto Rico's, there's poverty, it's poor, you can't develop all this, and that's true, that's correct. But then they create the poverty. That's the thing. The colonial regime creates the poverty, creates dependence, and then makes you poor for decades and over a century, creates that poverty, extracts your wealth, and then when you want to be free, they use that same poverty as the excuse not to free you. So waiting for Puerto Rico to become this like a Singapore under colonial rule is never going to happen, because the point of colonialism is not to create a rich Puerto Rico, is to extract wealth from Puerto Rico. And this is not Puerto Rico. This happens to every colony in the world. Yeah. France did it, Portugal did it, Spain, everyone does it. That's the point of having colony. So the book explains how much wealth and gets into the numbers, how much wealth the US takes out. And then Puerto Rico's left with pretty much nothing. And then in that dependency, then we're told, oh, you're too poor to survive on your own. Well, duh, of course. Yeah. That's the point.
So let's say Puerto Rico becomes a sovereign country. Can you, without giving away too much, because we want people to get the book, what are some of the economic development strategies that you map out, that you propose for a sovereign Puerto Rico?
Just being sovereign in and of itself, we would have so much authority and power over the economy that right now we have zero, literally nothing. All right. First off, we would have access, we would establish and create our own customs, aduanas, our own customs service to control what comes in and out of Puerto Rico, our ports of entry. Just that, all right? Just that, controlling that would give Puerto Rico, billions in revenue, just doing that. Without even going to anything else, any other taxes or fees or anything like that. So just doing that, and would be a big economic, starter, and would help Puerto Rico go forward. The other one is that now we can then attract companies from overseas and even from the U.S. to come to Puerto Rico, but not do it like they do now, where it's like, come to Puerto Rico, we'll give you, here's a whole menu of tax exemptions. So you come here and pay almost no taxes at all. No, you come to Puerto Rico, pay some taxes, but then you have access to our infrastructure and our talented human resources. Puerto Ricans have talent. Many companies come to Puerto Rico for the Puerto Ricans, and that's our major resource, our human capital. So, we can then ask companies from Japan, obviously US, and then Japan, Canada, other European countries, China, Korea, Japan, Singapore. or other country, I'm not saying only those, but to come to Puerto Rico to invest, but under our terms, where we as Puerto Ricanos and Puerto Ricanas can benefit from it. If they're going to be in Puerto Rico, great, they're helping the economy, but they need to pay some taxes, not be there for free. But then by doing that, they'll have access to the Puerto Rican market. And then from Puerto Rico, they can export to the North American market, Latin America, the Caribbean market. So Puerto Rico can become like an export platform for many companies to establish themselves. That's just one. The other one would be internationalization, where then we would reach out and establish our own embassies and consulates around the world. But also, embassies and consulates are not just for passports and visas. They would really, really be used to promote Puerto Rican exports overseas. So we can have Boricuas. Maybe some of even the agriculture, but even more technology businesses. So many Puerto Rican businesses can then export to Spain, to the European Union. We can develop free trade agreements with those countries or trading blocs. Right now, we can't do any of that because we're a colony. So just doing that, we would attract so much business, help Puerto Rican companies, and with all these things that we can do. But again, right now as a colony, the people in charge in Puerto Rico do not have that vision. Their vision is just keep asking for federal funds. That's it. Fondos federales. That's it. Yeah. Keep asking for fondos federales, maybe a little development here and there, little growth, but not too much. So they don't want to have a Puerto Rico that's too developed, because then Puerto Ricans will realize, oh, wow, we can develop ourselves and we don't need the U.S. We don't need to be a colony. So they don't want that.
There was a couple of other strategies that you shared in your book that I found really interesting. I'd love you to take a deeper dive into. But you specifically talked about the air and the sea. That those can be streams of revenue for Puerto Rico if it were to be a sovereign country. Can you share a little bit about how Puerto Rico would benefit from, maybe I'm not articulating this right. Yeah, like airspace, maritime law. Like how would Puerto Rico benefit economically from that?
Okay, so I'll do the airspace first and then the maritime. Okay. So with the airspace, so again, many people don't realize this, and it's not people's fault. This isn't taught in schools, but so every country has airspace, every territory in the world, airspace, all right? And then when a plane flies over in your airspace and lands, when they land at the airport, they have to pay landing fees. Every plane that lands does this. This isn't just like special planes. No, every plane. All right, Delta, everyone, Spirit. Like I say, everyone does it. Now, those are fees, landing fees and facilities fees that they pay to the government. All right, perfect. Now there are other fees called overflight fees. That it's when a plane flies over your territory, your airspace, but they don't land. They just keep going to their final destination. Okay. When they're flying in your airspace, it's like they're leasing that space for an hour or 2 hours, however long they're there. They're leasing it. They're not there for free. This happens to all nations. Sovereign nations can do this. Okay. Now the way they collect fees is different. Some have like a flat rate. You go in, you pay $500, boom, you're gone, like that. Or so the plane comes in there, and then the fee is based off how many miles they're in, and then it keeps going, how many miles. There's different ways of calculating that, whatever. But the main thing is that right now in Puerto Rico, every time a plane lands in Puerto Rico or a plane overflies our airspace, all that money goes to the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. Puerto Rico sees not a penny of that goes to Puerto Rico. Now, as an independent nation, we would finally have that authority, and based off the calculations that I found online and FAA documents, and then some projections that I made, with landing fees, we'd be making a few $1 million off of that. But the big one is the overflight fees, where we would be making, if I remember, it was like $124 million a year. And that's money that Puerto Rico doesn't even see right now. All that money is just happens in Puerto Rico, but goes directly to the FAA. Wow. And those are things that with sovereignty, we would finally have authority over that stuff, and again, and enrich Puerto Rico. We're Puerto Rico's biggest asset, along with its people, it's its geography. And that's what people don't realize. Like, Spain loved Puerto Rico because of our great geography. The US invaded Puerto Rico and took it over because of our great geography. So our geography has benefited other people, not Puerto Ricans. You see? So with sovereignty, we can finally use our geography, our great location in between 4 continental markets: North America, Europe, South America, and Africa. We're right in the middle. Perfect geography, okay? And when you have perfect geography, you don't need to be as large as Russia or Brazil. And that's another that we can talk about later about small countries and development.
Definitely, because you use Singapore as an example, which we'll definitely get into that one. Let's talk about maritime law, though. So, like, how would Puerto Rico benefit from the seas?
From the seas.
The ocean.
We're an island.
Yeah.
We have to look at the sea not as a barrier, but as a bridge. So it's not like it separates us from the other Caribbean islands in the world. It unites us. Mm-hmm. Now, how can we unite with the world? Ships. But right now, as a colony, Puerto Rico is controlled by the U.S. Maritime Fleet. There's the Jones Act. I mean, the whole book could be written just on the Jones Act, but I tackle it. I feel enough and educate people on it in the books so that you know exactly what it's about. Basically, it's a ship that goes from a U.S. port to another U.S. port, which Puerto Rico, San Juan would be considered, can't be on a foreign ship. It can only be on a U.S. flag ship that's made in the U.S. and staffed by American citizens. All these requirements, okay, but then by doing that, that shipping service is the most expensive in the world. So Puerto Rico's forced to use this expensive shipping service, right? And who's making money off this? They are. These particular shipping companies, right? This law is so bad that it even impacts and hurts American businesses. I mean, there were states trying to get rid of the Jones Act, but that shipping lobby is so powerful that doesn't matter if you're a state, and have congressmen, senators, and all that. You cannot. It's really difficult to even budge on that.
If I'm remembering correctly, not to interrupt you there, Javier, but I think the Jones Act was one of the big hangups on like aid getting to Puerto Rico too, like from other countries. Like if I'm remembering correctly, if another country wanted to send something to Puerto Rico, or even just like generally exports, imports, like to your point, U.S. ports. Like if France wanted to send Puerto Rico something, they'd have to send the ship to the U.S. They'd have to get put on a U.S. ship, sent over to Puerto Rico. Hence why, things cost a bit more on the island compared to, what the average salary is for a worker on La Isla.
Yeah, exactly. So just with so that impact, especially with Hurricane Maria, that impacted a lot of the distance. So because of the Jones Act, prices in Puerto Rico they go up pretty much about 20% increase. Okay. And along with that, there's with all the direct and indirect impact that the Jones Act has in Puerto Rico, that impacts, it's like, we call it the Jones Act tax. It's like a 7.2%, an additional tax that families, like every family has to pay, just for buying goods, eggs or whatever. You end up paying all this extra money. Now with sovereignty, we could literally would never have to pay that ever. So pretty much there's it's a whole racket shakedown, economic shakedown, where Puerto Rico is a great market for them, not because of free trade or because they're the best company, is because they're the only ones we're allowed to go with. Right. It's a colonial captive market where, they're in charge. They set the rules, they set the prices, and we have to use their services, even though they suck, literally, and are super expensive. So what are you going to do? Now, as a sovereign nation, we can then either use them if we wanted to, if they're the best price, or get other foreign ships, other shipping services that every other country uses, or we can establish our own shipping fleet. And I go that route where Puerto Rico, I explain in the book, Puerto Rico can establish its own like shipping lines, like Navieras Oceánicas, and we can literally do a lot of business with that. I mean, Puerto Rico could really make a lot of money, and also lower the prices for that. I even find where we can get the boats from. I even show how because I know a lot of the stateholder, they're gonna see all these plans and they're gonna look for any little thing to oh, you can't do that because of this one little thing, So one big one has been, oh, that sounds so nice, but how are you gonna pay for that? How are you gonna pay for all those ships? Okay.
Always the go-to question. Always.
Thank you for that, because Puerto Rico has money, and then with sovereignty, we'll have more than enough money to pay this. So you can get an example of this. Fortunio and all these other, like Statehood, corrupt contractors and these people, one of them, he made, I think it was like $112 million during his, time in the government. Wow. And, it's like publicity stuff, putting up signs, the public relations type of stuff, right? With that money, I found a place online where they have secondhand ships, cargo ships, where Puerto Rico could buy and own, not even lease. We could own them, and we would have over 40 ships in Puerto Ricans' hands. And just with that, we could have one of the largest shipping fleets in the Caribbean. So that's what we could have done with all that money, $112 million. We could have done that if we were sovereign, but no, as a colony under stateholders, all that money went to pay for one guy and his public relations projects.
Well,
you see, they just, there's money, but they don't know how to manage it, or they use it for themselves. They don't have vision. They don't have any vision of how can we make Puerto Rico a better place, a more economically powerful. Nothing. It's just corruption, and so that's what I'm getting at. With sovereignty, it's not just going to be, we're done with the Jones Act finally, but then we can do more. We have a whole maritime economy that we can establish, and I go into more details in that in the book. With our fishing, we could do fishing projects. I mean, oceanic farming, that's a really, really good one, where Puerto Rico could develop, maritime acres of kelp. And with kelp, you can also create ethanol. You see, we don't have to have acres and acres of corn or soybean. No, we can do that with kelp. And there's technologies and some places that are doing this now. In terms of energy, we can really do a lot with maritime energy. There's again, tidal energy, maritime energies. There's these floating electrical buoys that they just float and they move with the waves. Every time they move, that creates energy. Look at that. That's
never
amazing.
Heard of that before. That's amazing.
We can have fields of this way out in the distance in a specific part of our territorial sea, and also our exclusive economic zone, which is huge. There's a map of it in the book. It's huge, and that's another thing. When Puerto Ricans think that Puerto Rico está pequeña, so tiny, look at this map. Puerto Rico there's two Puerto Ricos. Territory Puerto Rico, land, and then maritime Puerto Rico is pretty huge. If I remember, I think Portugal can fit inside that territory, that maritime space. It's pretty big. So in that space, we can do so many economic development projects, initiatives. And again, like I'm saying, what I'm saying here, Puerto Rico's economic development agencies, they don't understand that. They don't have any understanding of this. All they do is just tax breaks and beg for federal funds. Yeah. That's it. That's all they got.
And regressive, to add on to that, and regressive taxes on everyday, working families, working people.
Exactly.
I will say, just going back to the Jones Act, we had two speakers on. It was Federico A. de Jesus and Laura Rodriguez. They had written a piece in American Progress that was talking about the different executive actions that the Biden administration could take to really invest in kind of bringing Puerto Rico back to prominence. And one of the arguments they make is waiving the Jones Act for Puerto Rico. And the number that they threw in there was that the Jones Act has shown to cost Puerto Rican consumers $1.5 billion per year. Year, billion with a B per year. Mind blowing. That's just money that's just thrown out there for a law, for an law that does not have to be in place. So again, I would argue Jones Act is a form of aggressive taxing on everyday Boricuas living on La Isla. And again, that's all money that could be kept within the island, but is just literally thrown in the water.
You know what? Just with that if Puerto Rico could keep that 1.5 billion for itself, that is enough for Puerto Rico to establish its own maritime economic shipping lines. I mean, all those things I talked about in the book, just that 1.5 can do all that. Yeah. Well, but right now we go to those shipping companies.
Yeah. No, and that's an unfortunate reality for sure. You have a section in the book that's dedicated to this, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. What would you say to somebody that reads your book, is hearing these economic strategies you've shared in our conversation today, and think, well, if Puerto Rico was its own independent country, what does that mean for like federal aid if we're hit by a hurricane or have earthquakes? What does that mean for Social Security for people that retire? What does it mean for Medicare, Pell Grants? What does that mean for Puerto Rico? Where does all that go, and how do we account for that missing?
Great question. The federal aid that Puerto Rico receives, it's now what I consider federal aid. It's the federal, like what the money is called aportaciones, the money that goes directly from the federal government to the government of Puerto Rico. There's that. Then the money for the food stamps, like the program, El PAN, Asistencia Nutricional, that, and then the Pell Grants. Those three are what most Puerto Ricans would consider ayuda federal, like the federal aid. There are other things that the U.S., they send money for, but it's like to maintain federal agencies and stuff like that. But and then so it's really the federal aid is 4.6 billion, okay, which is money just from the U.S. to Puerto Rico. Now, the Social Security and Medicare, which together is about 12 billion. And I remind people in the book that that money is not a gift. Puerto Ricans pay into that. So, it's money taken from Puerto Rican paychecks that because of the FICA tax that go to the United States, and then they send it right back to you, to whoever's eligible to get Social Security and all those programs. But it's Puerto Rican money. They're just sending it right back to you because we put into the program. So that's not a gift. So you see, now stakeholders, they like to combine that and make it seem that if with independence, you would stop receiving your Social Security payments. That is utter lie, total misinformation. You can even go onto the Social Security website, okay? And if you receive Social Security and you move to a foreign country, you just have to tell them where to send the money to. That's it. You can still get the money. The only caveat to that is, I think 2 or 3 certain countries that they won't send the money to, but they'll put it like in a separate account for you. Like if you move to Cuba or North Korea or Iran, I feel it's those 3. They won't send the money there, but they'll put it aside for you until you come back to the U.S. or whatever, or go to another country. That's it. But you see what I'm saying. So in a sovereign Puerto Rico, you would still be receiving your Social Security payments. That would not be disrupted at all. But the stakeholders, they keep saying that people will lose it as a scare tactic, even though it's totally false. And the Social Security Administration website says otherwise, but they still say that.
Well, even even
Yeah.
if the scenario you map out in your book were to become a reality, even if people that may be younger that are paying into Social Security now, yes, they'd still get those payments, but paying into something that takes care of you in retirement once, post independence, theoretically, Puerto Rico could create its own Social Security system, invest in its own pension funds for union workers. I mean, we don't have to. It's okay to recreate the wheels if there's stuff. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's okay to recreate the wheel. We just have to be creative enough and courageous enough to want to create something that takes care of our people in a different way than what we've experienced up to this point. So Just because the relationship with the United States may end, that doesn't mean that the idea of Social Security ends with it.
No.
That's a free idea. We don't have to pay anybody for that.
We can even create our own. In the book, I proposed the creation of a new one, just similar, and we can even make it better to even increase the payments or to cover more people.
Yeah.
Or people don't have to wait till they're I don't know, like 60, whatever. They can retire earlier. We can create our own system and try to make it better.
I told you this before we were recording. I was like, man, your book's heavy, man, but there's a lot of really good information in it. And I think for people that read it, not only do you try to give a backdrop, like to kind of give people a base understanding of how you're tackling something and why you're tackling it from the perspective that you are. But I think the other positive there is that you're able to now introduce people. Maybe somebody hasn't heard of the Jones Act and they're hearing about it in your book. Next thing you know, they're going on Google, they're doing their own research and realizing just how problematic of a law that is. So I think this is not only acts as a good roadmap, but also a good gateway for people that want to educate themselves on the reality that Puerto Rico faces. But the probably another one of the things I really like in your book is that you actually, because I like numbers, you actually break down like a budget of how the money that comes into an independent Puerto Rico could be used for different national investments and budget increases. And we're not going to go into like every line item in this interview, because again, that's like, we're talking about a 10-part episode at that point. Yeah. But one of the things that I really want to encourage people listening to look into, and maybe you could say a few words on it, Javier, but you had said, with all this money coming in, we could allocate $250 million to increase the budget for un tren urbano and a national train system. So a metro rail in like the San Juan area, as well as a train system that goes pretty much all around the island. Can you say a bit more on how you kind of developed that what would you call it? I guess for lack of a better term, train map. How did you come up with that?
Well, I already thought, Puerto Rico and many people, Puerto Rico used to have a train system. It was dismantled in the 50s. Mm-hmm. Idiots, only idiots would dismantle the train.
And was that for, keep me honest here, Javier, but was that for transporting goods though? Was that like sugarcane, or was that for like consumer use with somebody?
Both. Okay. There were train stations, and you could find black and white pictures of people going on trains.
Yeah. Okay.
But also trains that had cartloads of sugarcane, mm-hmm, all that. Mm-hmm. But without that, then people became dependent on cars. Everything just became car based, and people have always wondered, like, oh, it'd be great to have that, Then el tren urbano happened in the early 2000s. They finally got that going, but I explained in the book all the bad things that happened with that. Like good beginning, but then they just screwed it up by the statehood corruption. They just hiked up the prices, made it super expensive. And then the only thing that they created was this, I think it's 10 mile line, just one little, that's it. That really doesn't connect the most visited areas of San Juan at all. Wow. The airport, not connected. Old San Juan, not connected. Most of Santurce, not connected. Come on, really? So right now, the tren urbano system is functioning. It doesn't have a lot of ridership because of those situations. It's just one line, and it doesn't really connect to many other places, you know. So so when I developed this economic plan and then how we're going to use the money, I thought, man, we need to really make a good train system, metro rail in Puerto Rico, but also a national rail system, not just keep everything in San Juan. So I looked online, couldn't really find anything. The little bit that I did find, I found that there were efforts in the 70s to kind of begin some kind of metro rail, national rail network, but it died on the desk of statehood or governors, Ferre, and nothing happened. It just let it die right there. Okay, so then I'll do it myself. I studied about rail systems. I read a lot about it, looked at many maps. So I wanted to make a train, again, like a hypothetical. How could it look? I mean, I'm not saying this is going to be the exact train system, but something, just so people can imagine how it could look.
Yeah, because I did have an issue with it, Javier, because you go around the island, and I think maybe almost to El Yunque, I think, if I'm visualizing it correctly, or maybe a little deeper into the island from the San Juan part, but like the rest of the inner part of the island. No. But again, that's like a whole another undertaking. Like building along the coast is a lot easier than building inward. So
exactly,
as a start, I love it. But I was like, man, give me the proposal for deeper in the island. Maybe in the next book.
It wasn't. I made it go through areas where there's already like autopista there. That type of. It's easier.
I see what you're saying.
Huge
so
roads.
It can connect.
Like that. Mm-hmm. But in the middle of the island, it's difficult. Not because I don't like Barranquitas.
Yeah, be careful. My wife's from there. Be careful what you say about Barranquitas. No, I'm just kidding.
Love it. The only reason, it's geography. It's just the topography, the mountains. Right. No, I mean, anything, you could do anything, of course, but I made it go to like Caguas, and then it goes, because like that area, and then goes to Salinas and to Ponce. It just following the autopista that's already there. So we would maybe right off to the side have this elevated train or ground level, whatever. We could do that. But then for other areas that don't involve a lot of mountain, but there's already a big road, like from Arecibo to Utuado, there's the Ruta 10. That's already space that's made, so you can have I mean, like a tranvía, like a light rail there from Arecibo, go all down to Arecibo to Utuado, and then from Utuado, anyone in that region who wants to get on the train, all you have to do is go to Utuado. You don't have to go to Arecibo. You don't have to go to Bayamón. You just get to the closest part of it, and then that's it. Then you're connected. I also made one go from Aguadilla, Moca to San Sebastián. That was the other light rail situation. I'm sure there are other light rails that you can also do, but for the interior of the island, I really couldn't. I mean, even for light rail, because some of these roads are so, the roads, right? So imagine trying to put a train through those little, I mean, even having two cars on the road, and you're like, la curva, it's hard.
Yeah, mi familia is de San Lorenzo, and man, I tell you, driving up there in the montañas, it's fun and not at the same time.
Exactly. Imagine even a light rail, not even a whole train, a light rail. That's going to be really. So the reason that happened in the map was really just topography. That was it. But I thought of a way to, even in those situations, that would generate, even the train, even if it didn't run through there, it would generate the economy, because now people can create like Uber businesses, like Carro Público. So you can literally, for example, if you're in Ay Bonito, if you're some guy with a car in Ay Bonito, you could start a business of just going from Ay Bonito to Calle to get on the train. Bunch of people that need to go on the train from Ay Bonito or from the surrounding areas don't have to then drive anywhere. They just get to Ay Bonito or wherever town you're from. And so, that would create a whole network of like small businessmen and women that have cars, almost kind of like an Uber service, you know, because that people would be using the trains and tourists, and that would bring more tourists. Because imagine if you're in Hotel San Juan having fun at the beach, but then you want to go to Calle or Barranquitas, you don't have to, you know, some people don't want to drive in Puerto Rico, some tourists don't want to drive, whatever. I get it, it's hard, but you can just take the train to Calle, and then from Calle, you get a carro público, the whole line of cars that could be waiting, you get on, boom, and you go where you got to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that would, even though the train wouldn't pass through there, that specific town, it would generate some economic activity, because now that the train is close, you can really develop some you know, carro público businesses type of like that.
No, yeah, definitely. If there's not that there should be communities like this in Puerto Rico, but if there's a community that has been divested from you know, having access to the train, especially if they may not own a car, and that can take you to a part of La Isla where there are job opportunities for you that you can provide for yourself, provide for your family. Like, you're opening up entire new avenues. But again, just what a missed opportunity on public transit. And again, to the Metro Rail, you mentioned, like, man, how you get, again, regressive taxes? How are you going to tax people for public transportation? How are you going to charge them an arm and a leg for public transportation? It's normally not super affluent folks that are taking public transit. It's just not.
Exactly. No, and that map that I made, which I'm sure you know, it went viral. I mean, I put it up on Twitter, and that thing blew up.
Yeah.
I mean, it got over 100,000 shares. Wow. I mean, it was like a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we'll be sure to put it up on our YouTube for people watching. We'll put the map up on so people can see it too.
Oh yeah. And then also, it would even help people with their jobs, like with a train system like that, and even with an expanded Tren Urbano. I expanded the Tren Urbano to go to all these different areas. You wouldn't have to live in San Juan. You can live in Naranjito. You can live a little farther out, and then when you go to work, it's easy. It's just get on the train, boom, ya tú estás ahí, you know. Right. So you can do that, and then also for university students, you know, like yes. You know, this whole train network will connect all the major campuses of Puerto Rico. So you don't have to live right there, or if you do, great. But then when you want to go back in the weekend to see your family or your boyfriend, girlfriend, and the other side of the island, you can do it super quick. Exactly.
So yeah, and you know, Puerto Rico's not too big. You can drive around the island in a day. So it's not like we're talking about making a train from Maine all the way to California. Like you can make this happen. It's realistic, but it's all about making sure you're making the proper investment. Javier, you do like a little itemization of how that money could be properly invested, including a train system. Last question I have on your book. You mentioned how one of the criticisms against or counter arguments against independence for Puerto Rico comes down to size. That some people will say, Puerto Rico's too small to be economically sustainable, at least not economically successful. It's just way too small. And you actually compare it to Singapore. Could you share that Singapore example?
The size situation, I mean, really, when it comes to international economics and countries and correlations between size and economic success, size does not matter. Okay, size does not matter at all. In fact, the data, the economists I have written on this subject pretty much concur that the size of your territory has nothing to do with your prospect of economic success. Nothing. There are many huge countries that have tons of natural resources, minerals and forests and a bunch of stuff, but they're poor. Why? That has nothing. That's another political reason. Nothing to do with the size of the territory. Nothing. Countries as huge as Brazil. Brazil is humongous. Russia, huge. Yet there are people in both countries that are living in poverty. I mean, you would think everyone there would be living it up with such a huge country, right? But then you have the smaller countries who know, because they have to. It's not because it's like a choice. You have to position yourself in the international economy and use your geography and your people. See, that's the thing. Your people is the big resource, and your geography. An example is Singapore, where it's literally so tiny that the size of Singapore is the same. I even in the book I have a little map so you can see how big they are. It's the same size as the San Juan metro area. So if you include San Juan, Bayamón, Guaynabo, we have a map here, Toa Baja, Toa Alta, Trujillo, Cataño, all together, that's the size of Singapore. And Singapore is a major economic power, literally. I mean, they're little, but doesn't matter because size, like I said, size doesn't matter for that. And it's your people, your economic development plans, how you interrelate with the other countries, your diplomacy, your international economic diplomacy. Puerto Rico, for example, Puerto Rico could easily negotiate when we get our independence, a free trade agreement with the United States. That'd be great. That'd be great for us, great for them. Okay. We can also then do a free trade agreement with the European Union, with Spain and the EU. That would be amazing. And we can also, that's two of the largest trading blocks in the world that we can have equal access to for our goods and services. And again, Puerto Rico, for its size and our geography, where we are, like I said, right in the middle of the Atlantic, in between four continental markets, close to the Panama Canal. I mean, it's like real estate, location. I mean, we have a very good location with good size of territory, great maritime area, great talented people. It's just that we're under colonial regime. We can't, go forward or develop entirely to our full potential when you're controlled by another nation and then ruled by local Boricuas who don't have the vision.
Hola, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon here, founder and host of the Paseo podcast. Thanks for listening to the show, where we highlight stories by, from, and about the Puerto Rican community, from La Isla to the diaspora. If you want to help us share the diverse and vibrant stories that make up the Puerto Rican communities here on Paseo Boricua in Chicago and around the world, subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribing helps more people find the show and will help you make sure you never miss an episode. Leaving a 5-star rating and showing some love in the comments helps too. You can also give a donation by looking up the Paseo podcast on savechicagomedia.org. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy the show. Who determines what being Puerto Rican is? What does being Puerto Rican mean? I know everybody has a different, unique answer that's meaningful to them. So I ask you that now, Javier. What does being Puerto Rican mean to you?
For me, being Puerto Rican means identifying with Puerto Rico and loving Puerto Rico. Because some people arrive in Puerto Rico because they weren't born in Puerto Rico, but they're so Boricua. They love Puerto Rico. They identify with Puerto Rico more than some people who are born in Puerto Rico. Their last name is Gonzalez, but they hate being Puerto Rican. You see? So sometimes, and I've seen it with those comments, and I've gotten this myself because I was raised in the diaspora, and whenever I get my pro-independence talks or beliefs, whatever, I get attacked by statehooders who then try to say that I'm not Boricua. And I'm like, wait. So the people who are trying to eliminate and destroy the Puerto Rican nation so that we become some generic Hispanic American, are now you're the judge of being Puerto Rican? No, sorry. You don't get to do that. You see? It's like some people are born in Puerto Rico and thus they're Puerto Rican. Great, whatever. Even if they're stateholder, I would still consider them Puerto Rican. Great, cool. There are people who are born Boricuas, but their parents, and they're born overseas in the U.S. and other countries, but they identify with being Puerto Rican. That, for me, you're Boricua. You identify with Puerto Rico, maybe all you have is you're born overseas, you don't even speak Spanish, your grandfather was the Boricua in the situation, you have no other Boricuas, but if you decide to self-identify as Boricua, who the hell am I to say you're not? You're Boricua. You see? What if a Puerto Rican is born in France and they only speak French, but they identify and they love Puerto Rico and they accept Puerto Rico as their nation? They're Boricua. You see? I've even heard situations where people who are not even ethnically Boricua, let's say, like, I think there was this, like, I forgot the girl's name, but some Russian girl who was adopted by a Puerto Rican family as a little girl, not like some 25-year-old woman, like a little girl, a little Russian girl adopted by Boricuas. She lived in Puerto Rico, her whole formative years in Puerto Rico, and she considers herself, and she speaks Boricua Spanish. She's like Boricua now, and she considers herself Boricua. I would too. If she considers herself Boricua and she identifies with the Puerto Rican people and the nation, and you were raised in that family, I would say that you're Boricua, especially if you also say that. Now, what I don't like is when, for political reasons, like what happens with me, just because I'm pro-independence, but mira, él vive en la diáspora, so I'm not Boricua enough. Or some Puerto Ricans, again, and I hate to say this, but it's usually been, at least in my family, the statehooders, who try to be like the judge of what's Puerto Rican or not. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, not really now, and I like it now, but when I was a kid, I didn't like pasteles. Like the smell of it, I just didn't like it. So imagine. So I'm like, I'm growing up in Orlando, New York. Mm-hmm. I come back to Puerto Rico on vacation. Somebody had a pastel somewhere. Javier, ¿tú quieres pastel? Like, no, I don't like how it smells. Ay, tú no eres Boricua. Oh. You're not Boricua now. And I'm like, what the hell? Because I don't like the smell of certain food. Now I'm not Boricua. So, you see, it gets, and many of them would say this knowing that I was pro-independence. So they're always trying to find any little thing to negate my Puerto Rican identity. It could be food or música, or like they'd be like, Javier, do you know this singer? Blah, blah, blah. They'll say some random name. I don't know who that is. Ay, tú no eres Boricua. No, that you don't get to say that. I don't care if you're born in France, in Canada, in the middle of the ocean in a boat. I don't care. If you identify with Puerto Rico and you love Puerto Rico and you want to see the best for Puerto Rico, you're Boricua. That for me is.
I appreciate that. Well, and speaking of getting in contact with you, for anybody that wants to stay up to date with what you have going on, how can people do that? Like social media channels, website, how can people pick up the book? Give us all the things. How can they keep up with you?
Good, thank you. So the easiest way, I'm not going to give you my personal email address.
No. Give me your home phone number.
Exactly. Or here's my phone number. No, but please, if someone wants to get in contact with me on Twitter, on Facebook, Javier Hernández, you can find me pretty easy. And on Twitter, it's, like the @ symbol, then Brexit book. That's it. You'll find me there. It's Javier A. Hernández. There's also brexitbook.com. This is the website where I put up a lot of the book information, some info, like some of my bio stuff, some of the art that I've done for like flag designs and stuff. But really just with that, you can get in contact with me. The easiest way is through Twitter. I check that frequently throughout the day. You can just DM me like that, if anything in particular. Seriously, even if you're reading the book and you have any question, like, why did he do this? Why did he mention this? Anything, please go on Twitter and ask me. All right. I'm not some ivory tower person who only answers 1 out of every 20,000 messages. I'll attempt to answer your message as soon as I can.
Awesome. Okay. Author Javier Hernández, thank you so much for being on the Paseo podcast.